Hi, I'm Colleen Wolke,
And I'm Catherine Scott.
and our presentation is on alarm fatigue. Today, we have three objectives for you. One, we're going to define alarm fatigue. Second, we're going to explain the levels of alarms and the nurse's ability to determine what's important and why we really can't ignore them. And three, we're going to talk to you about ways that you can overcome alarm fatigue and what we can do as future nurses to help keep our patients safe.
First, I want you to picture yourself in this situation. You are a nurse working on a busy telemetry floor. You have been assigned to care for John Doe. He has a history of heart problems and has been admitted for placement of a permanent pacemaker. Throughout the morning, you document that he ate breakfast, visited with his family, walked around the unit, and took a bath. You leave the patient and go finish your charting. You return to check on your patient and find he is unresponsive. You check for a pulse. There is none. You check the heart monitor and it shows no rhythm. You call a code and your patient is pronounced dead.
So now an investigation is going to be conducted to understand what has happened to this patient. And the investigation reveals that the patient's heart rate declined over a 20-minute period, continuing to fall until it stopped altogether. Throughout this time, warning alarms were triggered. The investigation reveals that you and 9 other nurses failed to recall hearing the alarms at the nurse's station or seeing the alarms on the hall monitor. It also noted that the crisis alarm at the patient's bedside failed to alarm because an unknown party turned it off.
How would you feel if you were that nurse, knowing that your non-response to these alarms resulted in the death of a patient?
This is the exact situation that happened at Massachusetts General Hospital in January 2010. And both the investigators and the hospital linked this patient's death to alarm fatigue.
So, what exactly is alarm fatigue? The Oxford Dictionary of Nursing defines alarm as a device for helping people with hearing difficulties that indicates the occurrence of an event by signal. This same dictionary defines fatigue as the inability of an organism, an organ, or tissue to give a normal response to a stimulus until a certain recovery period has elapsed. Put those definitions together and you get alarm fatigue as the inability to give a normal response to a device indicating an event.
And according to the Online Journal of Nursing Informatics, alarm fatigue is defined as the desensitization of a clinician to an alarm stimulus that results from sensory overload, which causes the response of an alarm to be delayed or even missed. And there are 3 defining characteristics that combine to form alarm fatigue. They are an environment with excessive and repeated situations, a lessened motivation and interest in surroundings, and a diminished capacity for physical and mental work.
In order to fully understand alarm fatigue, it is important to understand how alarm fatigue happens. As new nurses, we may say to ourselves, "This will never happen to me." By doing this, we are falsely reassuring ourselves. There are 3 attributes that put someone at risk for developing alarm fatigue. They are 1. Involvement of a healthcare professional. 2. The ability to subjectively evaluate feelings. And 3. A patient care environment with excessive stimuli. As a new nurse, we already have 2 out of the 3 things that put someone at risk for developing alarm fatigue. The only thing missing is working in a patient care environment with excessive stimuli. Almost all of us will find a job in this type of environment after graduation, so we will have completed all of the dangerous puzzle pieces forming alarm fatigue. These attributes contribute to the consequences of alarm fatigue, which are 1. A lessened capacity to give a normal response to a signal. 2. A significant clinical event missed or ignored that could lead to a potentially harmful patient situation. And 3. A limited perception of the clinical significance of the alarm signal.
Now, there are many contributing factors to alarm fatigue, and they include things such as inappropriate alarm settings, alarms being turned off, malfunction of alarm systems, and audibility of alarms not being sufficient to be heard throughout the unit. But the primary cause for alarm fatigue is nuisance or false alarms. The Joint Commission estimates that for one patient over a 24-hour period, the number of alarms can reach several hundred. Multiply that by 25 patients on the unit, and the nurses are being bombarded with thousands to tens of thousands of alarms on a daily basis. Of these alarms, the Joint Commissions estimate that between 85 to 99% of them do not require intervention by the nurse. We have found that evidence-based practice contributes these types of false alarms to be caused by parameter settings, not adjusting the alarms to the specific patient, improper sensor positioning, and improper skin preparation prior to the sensor application.
These types of false alarms create a situation like the story of the boy who cried wolf. With so many false alarms going off, the nurse will eventually become desensitized to the alarms and not respond appropriately. This can result in missed or delayed reactions. If an alarm is false, this type of reaction isn't pertinent to patient safety. But if this alarm is signaling a decline in patient health, a missed or delayed reaction could cause the patient harm. Attending to false alarms take up important time of the nurse's day. One study concluded that nurses spend 16% of their time silencing alarms. A normal shift for a nurse is 12 hours. 16% of 12 hours equals 1.92 hours. Of the 1.92 hours, only 23% of the alarms were of clinical importance to the nurse. So if you do the math, this means that out of almost 2 hours spent reacting to an alarm, almost 1.5 hours of these are spent on false alarms. No wonder nurses are experiencing alarm fatigue. An hour and a half of their time is wasted by alarms that are of no clinical importance.
And we also found that patients agree that nuisance alarms are a problem. In a survey, 77% of respondents state that nuisance alarms disrupt patient care. And I've seen this myself as a CNA at my own job. Patients have told us that they won't use their call bells because they're so afraid of the sounds that they make, and they're very loud, echo throughout the rooms, and they don't want to disrupt the other patients in the hall. This can put them at risk. Now, let's talk about the importance of alarms and different kinds of alarms. Now, I want you to think about all of the devices used in patient care. Just to name a few, there's vital sign monitors, pulse oximeters, ventilators, infusion pumps, feeding pumps, call bells, bed alarms, and that's just naming a few. All of these devices have alarms or even multiple alarms. Collectively, the devices in use on a single patient can produce hundreds of alarms every day. On an entire unit, the number of daily alarms can easily reach into the thousands or tens of thousands. I know that when we started in the medical intensive care unit, I didn't even know what bell was what. There were so many beeps and whistles and alarms. It took us a while just to figure out what was a vent, what was a call bell, what was an infusion pump, what was a feeding pump. It was really overwhelming. And managing all of that noise is an overwhelming task for any person on the floor, the patient, the family members, and especially the nurses, because we are responsible for these alarms. And we need to be able to figure out their meaning. We have to prioritize, respond, and we have to be able to really figure out what we have to act upon and what's okay to just watch for a little bit. Not only do many alarms require a trip to the bedside to assess and reassure the patient, they sidetrack busy nurses who may be engaged in other tasks, and it raises the risk for making errors and even for cross contamination if the nurse inadvertently touches the equipment before they wash his or her hands.
In any given ICU, there may be up to 40 different alarms sounding at one time. The human ear can only distinguish 6 at one time. This puts the patient and nurse at risk for missing an important notification due to the overwhelming noise level on the unit. According to the AJCN, there are 4 levels of monitoring alarms in a medical progressive care unit. A crisis alarm level is when a patient is experiencing asystole, ventricular tachycardia, ventricular fibrillation, ventricular bradycardia. These alarms typically have 3 beeps. A warning alarm level signifies tachycardia, bradycardia, or less than 2 episodes of ventricular tachycardia. These alarms have 2 beeps. An advisory or message alarm level could be a pulse oximeter or a premature ventricular contraction. These alarms have 1 beep. A system warning simply indicates an irregular couplet, lead failure, or suspended arrhythmia.
In a research study conducted in 2007, a medical progressive care unit was selected as a pilot unit for a quality-based improvement initiative that would enable the task force to quantify the frequency of cardiac monitor alarms on a single unit and to perform small tests of change to improve management of these monitor alarms. The task force was instructed to collect data from the cardiac monitors based on the alarm levels for 18 days. And what they found was that 90% of the cardiac monitor alarms were simply advisory alarms. Alarms on medical devices are designed to let healthcare professionals know that some kind of attention is required, either for the device or for the patient. Alarms are essential because an important nursing intervention may be required in order to avoid an adverse event.
The concept of alarm fatigue isn't new to nursing. Florence Nightingale identified unnecessary noise as the most cruel absence of care which can be inflicted either on the sick or well. This was over 150 years ago, and prior to alarms being invented. Even back then, she understood how a noisy environment could affect the patient's health and well-being. Between 2009 and 2012, 98 alarm-related sentinel events were reported to the Joint Commission. 80 resulted in death. 13 resulted in the permanent loss of function, and 5 resulted in unexpected prolonged care conditions. The Joint Commission associated most of these events to alarm malfunction, alarm misuse, and inadequate alarm settings. These are all things that contribute to alarm fatigue.
The ECRI Institute, which is a non-for-profit organization that uses research to improve patient care, identified clinical alarm hazards as the top potential danger area in hospitals in 2012, 13, and 14. This institution, along with the Joint Commission, the American Association of Critical Care Nurses, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Association for the Advancement of Medical Instrumentation, have all identified alarm fatigue and management as a safety issue that needs to be addressed. So, how do you fix the problem of alarm fatigue? We found some ways to help you combat alarm fatigue. In 2012, Boston Medical Center's med-surg floor went silent. Now, this was a planned silence. It wasn't a power outage. Instead of the crazy, non-stop beeps that normally occur on an ICU floor, the unit was unnervingly quiet. The unit was part of a task force that had developed a process that gave the nurses the authority to raise or drop the default heart rate parameters depending on the condition of the patient. For a change to be made, 2 registered nurses had to review the patient's alarm history and their medical record and agree that a different, lower, or higher rate was appropriate. These nurses received very specialized training and were constantly tested and had to score above 90% in order to be able to make these changes. The task force reviewed alarm data that included Boston Medical Center's cardiac telemetry monitoring, and it was revealed that 67% of the alarms came from violations in heart rate default settings. By empowering the nurses to change the alarm parameters, the number of audible alarms on the unit plummeted nearly 89%, from nearly 90,000 to roughly 10,000 in just a short 6-week period.
In April 2013, the Joint Commission, the nation's largest hospital accreditation organization, issued a Sentinel Event Alert warning of the dangers of alarm desensitization and urging hospitals to beef up alarm management protocols and alarm settings. As of January, hospitals are required to demonstrate that they have made alarms an organization priority and identify the types of alarms that they plan to target. By 2016, hospitals will have to develop and implement specific protocols aimed at curbing unnecessary alarms. In another study, the researchers stated that improved integration of the patient monitoring systems would undoubtedly reduce the burden of alarm fatigue. Obviously, ICU units have EKG monitoring systems at the nurse's station, but there is not always someone at the central monitor, so having sufficient staff is critical if we are to rely on an integrated monitoring system.
So after reviewing the research, we found several strategies for reducing alarm fatigue and to improve patient safety. Here are some of them. 1. Provide proper skin preparation for the EKG. This includes washing the isolated electrode area with soap and water. Expert opinion and research support proper skin preparation to decrease the number of false alarms. Secondly, change the EKG electrodes daily. Evidence suggests that changing these electrodes daily decreases the number of false alarms. In a quality improvement project, the average percentage of alarms per bed per day decreased by 46%.
You could also customize alarm parameter levels on ECG monitors. A 43% reduction in critical monitor alarms was observed in a critical care setting when default setting parameters were changed, including the customization of the alarms, and registered nurses were educated about the change. You could also customize delay and threshold settings on oxygen saturation via pulse oximeters, delaying a setting from the time the event initially occurs was revealed to when the alarm is triggered on an SpO2 alarm to 15 seconds can reduce the frequency of alarms by 50 to 70%. Or you could also provide initial and ongoing education about devices with alarms. Develop a safety culture embraced by staff members which promotes identification of factors may lead to patient harm.
So in conclusion, we would like you to know that we all need to be aware of alarm fatigue. Alarm fatigue could happen to any one of us. Alarm fatigue could lead to patient injury or possibly even death. As nurses, we have a duty to do no harm. Patient assessment, monitoring, and appropriate intervention may be considered the first steps to alarm management, elimination of alarm fatigue, and ensuring patient safety.
Healthy People 2020 has charged healthcare providers with the goal of ensuring the safe use of medical products. The goal's objectives are to focus on overall improvement of patient treatment and appropriate use of medical products. Medical products include drugs, biological products, and medical devices. These objectives reflect strong scientific support for safe use of medical products, which promotes better health among Americans. The appropriate use and monitoring adverse effects of medical products will 1. Decrease adverse events and harmful reactions by focusing patient safety efforts. 2. Improve the overall effectiveness of treatment by reducing harm from medical products. And 3. Further personalize medical treatment.
Now, obviously, this goal of Healthy People 2020 is shared by all healthcare providers, as we all want to provide the highest quality care to our patients. By working together as a team, we can reduce the need for unnecessary alarms and improve the quality of all of our lives. So Catherine and I hope that if you remember one thing from this presentation, we hope that you remember the importance of alarms and remember that they can help save your patient's life.
Throughout this video, we played an EKG sound throughout this video. Did you notice it? Did it bother you? Did you eventually tune it out? This is how desensitization happens. Thanks for watching.